So in last two sessions, we had gone through the basics of Fusion application, overview of that. So this is what we had covered on day one. Overview of Fusion application, Fusion terminology. So there are some terms, new terms used in Fusion. So we have gone through those. Then how Fusion security is implemented, like functional security or function security, as well as data security. So how it is implemented, how to create a new user, implementation user. We have seen so far implementation user, not the business user. Business user we will cover in AP session. How do we create business users in Fusion? Then we had briefly touched upon how cloud licensing works or cloud subscription model works. So like there are minimum 10 user license which you get for financials, and like you will get two instances, one test instance and one production instance by default with your subscription, and you can get additional instances if required. So normally small companies like they go for only two, but bigger companies or like bigger organizations, they will go for 3, 4, 5 instances depending on their requirements. Then we had walked through the navigation user interface. What are different sections? How do we change the preferences, user preferences, or how do we change the password? All those things we had gone through. And then we started with functional setup manager. Like in EBS, we configure the module from the super user responsibility. So you go to general ledger super user or supervisor or payables manager. In those responsibilities, you will get a menu item set up, and within that you will configure. So each module will have its own responsibility to configure. But in Fusion, it is all centralized. So you have a functional setup manager or setup and maintenance work area where you will perform all the configuration related tasks. So as implementer, we will be focusing more on functional setup manager, how we configure how do we configure the application. So we had seen that and we started with functional setup manager. We configured, we created an implementation project, and after that we started configuring the basic enterprise structure. So that is what we had covered on day one. So as part of enterprise structure, we created legal address, location, and legal entity, and we had renamed the enterprise name. Enterprise is equivalent of business group in EBS. So we call it as enterprise, and here in Fusion, employees hired at legal entity level. Okay, so this is what we had covered on day one. Then on day two, we had started configuring the GL. So in that, first we had gone through some basic principles of chart of account design, like how do we design the chart of account, how many segments or which all segments should be there, what are mandatory segment labels. Segment label is equivalent of qualifiers. I think it is flex field qualifier in EBS. So here we call it as segment label. So primary balancing segment and natural account segment, these two are mandatory. And if we are using expenses or fixed assets, then cost center segment label is mandatory. Without this, expense module will not work, or fixed assets will not work. So we created our own chart of account. So in Fusion, chart of account creation is divided in two parts. So first we created the value set, chart of account value sets. So we had taken a very simple chart of account with three segments: company, department, and account. So we created 3 different value sets, and then we created chart of account structure, and then structure instance, and then we deployed that chart of account. So deploy is equivalent of compilation in EBS. And in EBS, you create, say you are creating 5 chart of accounts. I think you can compile that individual chart of account. But here deployment is for that KFF. So that if any of the chart of account is having any issues, like we had faced that issue, like somebody has completed the COA configuration and ready to deploy, but somebody else has not yet assigned the natural account segment, so that deployment failed. So here deployment is at chart of account level, not at or at key flex field level, not at individual chart of account level. And then we created a few values in COA value sets manually, and I had also shown the how do we upload the COA values through a spreadsheet, that is FBDI, file-based data import. So you get that template, you can get that template from docs.oracle.com. From that website you can get the template. Those templates are release specific, so you have to select the correct release and get your template, and then you can prepare the data offline, generate the CSV file. So it is a 3-step or 4-step process. First prepare those templates, then you load it to UCM server using file import and export menu under navigator. So let me just show you that. So from this file import and export, we had uploaded that file, and then you need to execute load interface file for import, that ESS process, which will transfer the file from UCM server to database server, and it will also load those files in interface tables. And then you will run the import process to import the data from interface table to base tables. And we had also gone through like how do we migrate the data from legacy application, and also I had we had discussed on integration. So what are different options for integration? How do we automate end-to-end integration? So all those we had discussed on day 2. And then we had gone through some COA related, we created some hierarchy, account hierarchy online, and we had seen the cross-validation rules. How do we configure the cross-validation rule, and how do we test those cross-validation rules? And then we started configuring the primary ledger. So we created one primary ledger, and we had completed that ledger, and at the end we had submitted review and submit accounting configuration. That is the process where it will validate the configuration, ledger configuration, and if ledger configuration is correct, then it will create a SBase cube for this ledger. Okay, and last topic we had covered was we created a journal manually as well as through spreadsheet, that is ADF-DI, equivalent of web ADI in EBS. So this these things were covered on day 2, and after every session we had done hands-on online. So I hope everybody is up to speed now and completed the hands-on. If anything is pending, so you have in that session you have completed it. So we will proceed with today's agenda now. So this is the agenda for today. Like last time we had completed the primary ledger setup and we created a basic journal. So this primary ledger setup is complete. So now today we will see reporting currency, secondary ledger. Then we had talked about SBase cube, so we'll get into more details of that, how it is created or what are the dimensions of this SBase cube, which is based on Hyperion technology. So we'll go through that, and then ledger set concept, data access set, journal creation. We have already seen these two topics, but we have a lot of things to cover today. And day 4, like tomorrow, we'll go through allocations. If we are not able to complete allocations today, then we will create allocations and some reporting tomorrow. Okay. So let's get started. So I have logged into the application, and we will go to setup and maintenance work area. So there are two options from where you can go, either through navigator from this left hand side menu. You will see setup and maintenance. Because I have a lot of roles, that's why it is going to second page. If you have less number of roles, then you will see everything in single page. So this is one way to access setup and maintenance. And another option is to click on this username, and here also you will see this setup and maintenance. Okay. And here again there are two options. Either you create your implementation project, which will give you a sequential task list, or you select financial and you configure it, but you need to make sure that you show all tasks and then you do the configuration. Normally I prefer this option, implementation of project, which will give you a sequential task list.
So, Manish, how do we create that implementation project? Just clicking there, or?
So after getting the instance, you need to enable the offerings. So here, action, go to offerings, and you need to enable those offerings. Like go to financials, and you will select those offerings, and then you will create that implementation project. So go to manage implementation project, and click on plus, and go to next, and select the offering which you want to implement as part of this implementation project. So select financials and check all the check boxes. Once you check this financials, it will open. So you need to select all these, not that parent is selected so everything will be selected. You have to select it manually. If you just click on this, check this checkbox for parent, then only GL configuration will be enabled for implementation. So if you want AP, then you need to select this expenses, fixed assets, customer invoice processing. Once you check this, then collections will be enabled. So you need to select all those checkboxes. Okay. And then click on save and open project. So as discussed last time, we are following this naming convention, like your initials, Mahesh Adani MA, and 2804. This is when our batch was started, 28th April. So any object which we are creating, be it ledger, be it value set, legal entity, everything will be prefixed with this. So like Jennifer is using JD, Mohan is using MR, Amol is using AM. So Arnab, I think he is using AS. So we are using this naming convention to name each and every object, so that when we are configuring, it will be easy for us to identify our setup, or it will be easy for me also to debug the issues if we are facing any challenges. Otherwise, what was the name of the value set, or what was the legal entity or ledger we had used, it will be a bit difficult. So in all the trainings, we follow this naming convention. Okay, so let's get into our implementation project. Okay, financials, and this is where common application configuration for financials. So GL related configuration, because it is the basis for all other configurations. Like we cannot go to invoice and payment configuration before configuring GL. So this is the one which you need to configure first. And in this, we had executed this process which will synchronize the information between OIM, that is Oracle Identity Manager, APM Authorization Policy Manager, and your normal transactional database. So initially user information should be synchronized between all these. So you run this process. First time you need to run. After that, system will automatically take care of synchronization, unless and until you want to if you have assigned a new role or something and you want that user to have that immediately, because this process, like background process, might take 10 to 15 minutes to synchronize. So if you want immediately, then you can run it again. Otherwise, it is not required. And then implementation user we had created, enterprise structure. So we had renamed the enterprise name. Then we created a location and legal entity jurisdiction. In this we created legal address. So wherever it is marked as star, so one of the tasks in that folder is mandatory. So wherever you have a star, this is a mandatory setup. We created legal address and then we configured the legal entity. Okay. So this is the name of my legal entity which I had created. This is the scope. So whatever you are configuring as part of these tasks, it is applicable for this particular legal entity. Okay. So let's just review our ledger. So primary ledger, let me go to specify. So my ledger name is MA2804 primary. Okay. So this is the chart of account, currency is GBP. This is the calendar. So everything we had configured in previous session, and this is the retained earnings account. So okay. And after we assign the balancing segment value to legal entity and ledger, and we directly submitted this review and submit accounting configuration. So this will complete the ledger setup. Now today, let's start with reporting currency. So say for example, you have a subsidiary in India for this UK company, and you want to so you will be creating two different ledgers. So maybe you can have same chart of account or accounting calendar and accounting calendar, but your currency, because in India you will be dealing in INR, in UK you are dealing in GBP. So you need to, when you are consolidating your financial statement or when your management wants to see, they wants to see the numbers in GBP currency. So you need to create a reporting currency for Indian ledger so that all the balances are translated in GBP. Okay. So this is where you can create your reporting currency. So because of the scope, like this scope is selected already, that's why I'm getting that header with the same primary ledger which we are using. So click on plus. So I'm giving this name MA2804 reporting USD. So GBP will be translated into USD currency. Currency conversion level. So there are multiple options like balance level. So directly in GL balances table, it will be converted. So no journal will be converted into your reporting currency. Otherwise, it will like if you select journal, then all the journals will be replicated in your reporting currency. And if you select subledger, then your subledger journal will also be converted into reporting currency. So normally, like we use balance level reporting currency. So your balances will be translated. Okay. Currency. So select, this is the reporting currency. Okay, so GBP balances will be converted into USD. Period, we need to specify the period average rate type and period end rate type. Period average rate type is used for your revenue account, revenue and expenses. So those will be translated using average rate type. So like depending on your requirement for exchange rates, you can select it. I'll just select corporate for both. Okay, and revenue and expense translation rule, whether you want to translate PTD balance or YTD balance, you can select that. And similarly for owner's equity translation, you can select PTD or YTD. There is a question in chat window, can we have more than one reporting currency for one LE? So I assume it is one ledger instead of legal entity. So yes, you can create any number of reporting currencies for same ledger. There is no restriction on it. Also, we'll come to that, but you can create reporting currency for your secondary ledger also. Okay, so very simple form where you will create the reporting currency. You need to be very careful because these things cannot be changed. So especially this balance level. So you need to consult with your customer and then only configure it. Okay. So like there are different scenarios. So let's save this. So next topic is secondary ledger. So in which scenario you create reporting currency and in which scenario you will create secondary ledger. Okay, so there are two things, reporting currency and secondary ledger. You know, we have 4 C's in ledger: COA, calendar, currency, and accounting convention or accounting method. Okay, now if you want your balances in only currency is different, rest all will be same, then you will go for reporting currency. Okay, so a perfect example is say Infosys. So they have subsidiaries in US, UK, Germany, everywhere, and their head office is in INR or India. So for all the balances, and say for example they are using global chart of account and January to December or April to March calendar, or say like in India they are using GCOA, that is global COA, INR and April to March calendar. Okay, and say IFRS accounting convention. In UK they are using the same thing. It's just a hypothetical example. Okay, the only currency is different. In US they are using GCOA, but they are following say Jan to December calendar, and instead of this US GAAP. Okay, so and they want to consolidate in INR. So what they can do, they can, and they will have to create separate ledger for all these 3 countries because your currency is different, and in US calendar is different. Because one of these COA is different, you will have to create a separate ledger. So here we will create a reporting currency as INR. Okay, so all the balances for this ledger will be converted into INR, because rest all are same. In this case, like your currency is different, sorry, here USD, your currency is different and accounting period is different, or accounting calendar is different, and you have a different accounting convention. Okay, and you want to report it in India. So what you will do, you will create a secondary ledger. Okay, and you will use GCOA. Okay, currency as USD. Okay, calendar as April to March, and IFRS as your accounting convention. So in this case, in secondary ledger, you will have to use sub-ledger level conversion for secondary ledger. Okay, and on this secondary ledger, you will create a reporting currency as INR, so that you will have GCOA, April to March calendar, IFRS, and currency as INR, so that you can consolidate your financial statement. Okay, so, and remember this, I have not changed the currency here. Currency of your primary ledger and secondary ledger should be same. Otherwise, it will create some issues in translation, or somewhere it causes some issues. So you should make sure that your currency of your primary ledger and secondary ledger is same, and you create a reporting currency. Okay. So I hope you understood the difference between reporting currency and secondary ledger, and all these are mainly used for consolidation purpose, because management, senior management wants to see the report or statements at global level, not at country level. So your country level management, they might be seeing balances or reports based on this, but when management is seeing, they might be using this, or in some cases they use a separate chart of account, currency, calendar, everything. So then they create another consolidation ledger. So we'll get into that when we are discussing the consolidation. So that also we will be discussing today. So what are different options for consolidation? So we'll see that. Okay. So now let's create secondary ledger. The secondary ledger, the configuration side, it is exactly same as primary ledger, except couple of steps. Okay, so for secondary ledger, you will have to create a chart of account. If your chart of account is not same in your primary and secondary, you will have to create that chart of account. And if it is different, like your primary COA is GCOA and say secondary is LCOA, local COA, or something like that, or vice versa. So here you have LCOA, that is local chart of account, and here you have GCOA. Then you will have to create this LCOA separately, create that primary ledger, and then you need to do the mapping between your local chart of account and global chart of account, or consolidation chart of account. Okay, you may have to define the calendar if it is different. Currency, as I said, like all ISO currencies are already there, so we don't have to. And if your accounting convention is different, then you will create that accounting convention also. Again, there are different conversion levels in case of second ledger. We'll see that. Okay. So for our this session, we will create a separate calendar, or we will reuse that same calendar. Okay, so let's let's create a separate chart of account, and we will do the mapping also, because calendar side there is no mapping, but for chart of account we will have a mapping. So I'll quickly show that. And we'll create a 2-segment chart of account very quickly. Create a value set. So we'll create 2 value sets. Validation type, as we discussed, it should always be independent. And dependent value sets are not yet supported in Fusion for chart of account. Say company is say 2 character long. And second value set for account. Okay, let's create the structure. So same thing we had done for primary ledger, we are doing it for secondary ledger. So this chart of account, we will be using a different chart of account. That's why we are creating another COA. Let's say secondary COA. Delimiter hyphen. Just click on save and click on plus. Company API name will be generated automatically. This API name is used by web services for referring to this segment. Company short term display width 4 or 2, I think 2. This we will store it in segment 1. Default value set. So let's select our value set. Secondary company, and we will associate that primary balancing segment, this segment label. Okay, and then let's create the second segment in our chart of account. Make sure that there is no space anywhere, otherwise it will cause a lot of issues. Like by mistake, if you have kept say space here, it will create issues. So you need to be very careful in designing this. Okay, and let's assign natural account segment label to this segment. Just 2 segments. Or let's create that third also as department. But we will use that same department list of values. I think it was 4 character. Segment 3. And assign this cost center segment label. Okay. Now, next step is to create a structure instance. So no need to go back to the menu. Okay, here let's create it. And 2804 secondary COA instance. Enabled structure name. So select the structure which we just created. System will automatically bring those 3 segments. One thing we need to make sure is all these are required. So go into all these segments and make it required. If you don't do this, then deployment will fail. Okay. So now my instance is created. I'm not going into the details of this because we have already covered this, all the fields on these pages while defining the chart of account for primary ledger. So this is equivalent of compilation of chart of account in EBS. So it will perform all the validations and you need to make sure that there are no errors. So depending on the number of chart of accounts in your instance, this process might take some time. Excuse me. There's no error so far, so should be fine. Okay, so my deployment is successful, completed successfully. Warnings like we can ignore it as long as it is not in your chart of account. Like somebody else has created few chart of accounts and having some issues. So that is fine, but make sure that your chart of account is not having any issues, warning or errors. So deployment status is now marked with green tick. So our chart of account is created. Okay. Let's quickly upload the values. Let's create a couple of values manually. So search for your value set. Don't click on this plus. This is to create new value set. Click on manage values and then click on plus. So 10, 2804. 10. Summary, no. Allow posting, allow budgeting, yes. Say 20. Okay, we'll just create two values here and say account manage values. We'll create two values only, or 2-3 values. So say 5. Let's say retained earnings, and we'll create one value for each so summary, no. Allow posting, allow budgeting, account type, so owner's equity, third party control account, no. Reconcile, no. Financial category is non-mandatory. Save. I'm just creating one value for each of these account types, so that we will do the mapping from your primary COA to secondary COA. Okay, and I'm using that same value set for department, so will not do anything. So now my values are created. Next step would be to map your chart of account, primary chart of account to secondary chart of account. So let's do this. Create this COA mapping. So MA2804 mapping, COA mapping. Okay, what is your target chart of account? That is your secondary chart of account. Okay, and your source chart of account, because primary balances or primary journals will be converted into secondary, so your target will be your secondary chart of account instance, and here we will use primary COA. Okay, so it will show the segments from your source chart of account, and like source company segment, how it maps to your target values. Okay, so say copy value from source not assigned, like if that segment there is no equivalent segment. Suppose we had another segment, say project, and in second ledger we don't have project, then we will say not assigned, or use roll up rules. So multiple accounts will go to single account, so you can use parent account values, so you can do that. Or these are your target values, target segments. And what is the source equivalent? Copy value from source not assigned. So not assigned, you will give some default value, or okay, or assign single value. So default value you can select. Okay, now assign single value. So here, when you say use roll up rules, so you will say target value is say 10, condition between, so you will say from, or say equal to source value 100, or you can say between 100 and 200 goes to 10. So you can define like this. So 20, condition between from 101 to say 500. Okay, so this is how this roll up rule will work. Now account segment, here also we will say use roll up rules. Okay, your account segment, and here we will map those like assets between, and I think assets were from 10,000 to so any values between these codes will go to this particular account. This mapping we will have to create. Okay, I think revenue was 3. Revenue between and this is our retained earnings account or owner's equity. So we will see. Department, we are saying like same value set is there, so we will say copy value from source, and it is department segment. Okay, so this is one option where you are mapping values by values for each segment. Then you have account rules. So account rules, like where you are mapping combinations. Okay, so this combination, like this is your target combination, which all combinations will be going from your source to this particular account. So you will create combination rules. So you have two options, segment rules or combination rules. Okay, so this is how we create the mapping.